Hey guys, we had a war versus Supple that we won that I didn't manage to stream because I forgot the war was happening and got pulled in with literally only 5 seconds left, and we got top assist in it, and I wanted to talk about what we changed and like what well there. In terms of the actual raid plan itself, I'm not exactly sure how that changed because I was not present for it, but I could talk about how the gameplay changed within the war itself and how that kind of turned into this result. The base concept for how the game changed is something that I think some people understand and some people don't, but it's this idea of having a high line. It's basically you push your healers up, you push your ball up, and you push your like kind of point groups up as well. And this creates this like kind of buffer zone. Like if you think about like this area as the point, or I can't really draw a half circle very well, but if you think about like that area as the point, if you have more people that are up on their half, it's going to be harder for them to like the other team to play because if they get forced back and they're like defaulting to like up here per se, they're going to get forced back to this space and then they're just going to get collapsed on by the people that are standing in this position and get the kills. So by pushing up, you effectively give yourself more time and space for healers to live because the people that are playing up top are not able to consistently be healed and they're not able to consistently pressure healers as well as you're able to be more offensive. The con of this whole strategy is if you're basically egoing their kill squad with this whole strat, and you're like, hey, if you can kill our healers, you probably win. If you can't, then we probably win. And that's like the base idea. You're kind of trading backlines to a degree. So it puts a lot of pressure on healers. And if you have the better healers, the strat is generally better for you. And if you have the worse healers, the strat is a little bit worse. And then there's also a layer of like your kill squad pressure. And if your kill squad pressure is better, it can be better. And if your kill squad pressure is worse, then it can be worse. But this whole idea it works pretty well right now because in general the game is super survivable in terms of kills to deaths. The last couple wars that I've seen, like this 100 assist thing, this is like in a 20-minute war, so this is actually a really high assist war. Typical wars right now, I would say for top end companies are less than 100 assists because the game has gotten super tanky. People have not been dying, and as a result of that, to be honest, the game has been a lot less fun for some people because it's been super positional. It hasn't been super kill hungry, as well as Supple lost this war probably because they were trying out some different strats or missing some key people to kind of lead those strats that they were trying out. It wasn't necessarily that they cooked too hard. I just don't think they have the pieces that are there. Supple's also kind of going through a thing that a lot of the New World companies are going through right now, where a lot of people have been quitting because the meta has not been super enjoyable for some players because it's just been very synergistic, not a lot of solo carry potential. It feels like you are like a wet sponge in terms of a melee now, and then you go in for a clump, you press your detonate button. If you don't have cleanse up, you're not going to do any damage. You hope for the best, try to get a kill or two, and then you get out and live. And that's why these assists are so low. You're seeing like less than 100 assists, as I said before, within the 30-minute war, and that's just like kind of extremely low compared to any other meta that's hadn't been had in New World. Typical wars in the past are usually along the lines of like 300-ish assists. So there's so few people dying now that it's just like generally not enjoyable for a lot of people to play the game, and we'll see how the changes that are going to be talked about by the devs tomorrow will address that issue or not. They may want to make the game more tanky. We'll see how that goes. But kind of hopping into this, I wanted to like kind of go over a VOD. This is going to be whirlwhip. It's not going to be my VOD because I wasn't really there. I want to skip the first 5 minutes because we spent 5 minutes off the start confused why we couldn't cap A, because we decided to troll ourselves and make it so that no one can talk in main comms and everyone was deafened or everyone was muted, so we couldn't hear each other for some reason with perms. And they had two muskets that were sitting on the side point. Muskets are off meta, I would say, for NA right now, but are certainly not bad. EU, like Parabellum, I believe, slots a musket. He averages like 25 to 30 kills a war. So if you think about like your kills are an aspect of sub 100, 25 to 30 kills is a lot of kills. Like that is very uh high value for a slot in this kind of rubber damage kind of spongy war setting. So it's like off of that, I think that makes a little bit of sense. That was really disruptive to us at first. The problem that you'll kind of see later on, kind of hopping to like raid plan point of view, is the muskets that they had were playing out and behind us trying to camp respawns. but we just dropped cannons, which is like kind of newer meta and didn't used to exist. The strat of going like really, really deep to camp respawns used to exist, but it's less good now because if you just drop cannons, you could just LOS the muskets if your healers play in front of the cannons, and then the muskets basically get null value because of the accuracy. Even with the exploit where you can quickscope, like they can't typically hit your healers if they have like siege back there. So you're in a weird spot where the muskets are kind of encouraging your team to push up, and because they were playing so far back, they actually didn't have as much pressure in the fort on these like side gates, and we're able to push in through side gates for free, which is the first time our side gates have gotten in versus Supple in the past like 2 to 3 months. For reference, their back gates also over rotated a bit, so we had like one gate that had like 10 people on there for five. So like all of this kind of culminates to they had too few people in fort, and we were playing a strategy this far. We're playing super aggro for fort, so they weren't able to effectively deal with that because if we're in the fort and they're outside of fort, they're effectively playing attack on defense, which is good if you're winning, but if you're losing, you're going to lose harder. It's kind of like a win more strategy that they were going for, which works to a degree, but doesn't work if countered, and we just countered it by putting down siege. But in terms of B, we had a split on B and C, so they're juggling between the two. Eventually, respawns from C went to B. We started winning by again doing this high line thing. You can see how our numbers are kind of pushed up. Their healers aren't able to play at the top of the point. Their blunderbusses aren't able to play at the top of the point. And if Supple typically isn't carried by their blunderbusses, they're not going to do super well in the war. This also doesn't help that they're down Devitt, I believe, who is their kill squad shot caller. So I don't think their kill squad like really knew what to do per se in this situation. Like they didn't have like a side that they pushed effectively, uh, as well as they're down a lot of the members of their starting point team. That being said, I think we were down also 2 to 3 members of our starting point team this war because some of us just didn't realize there was a war today for some reason, myself included. So I don't know if that's really an excuse, but in general, Supple is down leadership, and you have to think of it in terms of synergy. Supple historically I don't think this is controversial to say, but Supple slots for synergy over slotting for skills, and Dropout is always slotted for skills over synergy. So when Supple starts losing synergy, they're gonna fall behind too far. They don't have enough synergy to make up for the not the lack of skill, but like uh just the kind of mentality of like who is slotted, I guess. Like there's people in their roster that are slotted because they've been playing in those same groups for a long period of time, but when that group changes and you're left with that player who is like queuing OPR all day, you're effectively just not going to get the same output from them. They still did like very, very well, and I don't think that they've really had a roster issue, but I'm thinking that that was one of the reasons why they're starting to show some cracks at times. But I think moreover this war they just kind of got they didn't get rolled on B, but once we got the side point captured, I don't think that they found a way to get a super effective value off their kill squad compared to other wars. We're able to push up over that ridge on Everfall, which is usually the hardest spot to take. Which, by the way, this is Everfall, so this is like the hardest map to take in New World. I don't think that's controversial either. That's just kind of known. But we were able to push up basically for free. They had a relatively defensive comp, and they weren't able to invade our backline super well because of this high line. We're kind of egoing them. They're trying to get out, and we're catching them as they're getting out. We also had a lot of like free point presence because our IGVGs are playing so high up. Their blunderbusses weren't effectively forcing out our IGVGs because our IGVGs were adapting. We're playing behind their blunderbusses that were forced up near the point. So I could pause it when he turns around, when War turns around. But typically, what Supple will do is they have 4 IGBBs that they will slot right here, and these will just look at the people that are top the point and shoot them over and over and over again. We adapted to this later on by putting IGVGs kind of like behind them a little bit. And it turns out these guys don't know how to flick back and forth super well, so that was like a soft counter to them. We're able to harass people a lot, and then at times we'd come to point, but we're moreover just playing up there at that high line, trying to hold that space so that other people can take it more easily, and those blunderbusses are caught in the crossfire. If we go for a scream on point and the blunderbusses between us and the scream, they're going to get caught out, and you see how far they have to play it back accordingly, because they don't like to play where they have to turn around and then look forward, so they just give that space. And by giving that space, we're effectively playing top of point very well. You could see me right there making a cameo, but Whirl's able to play up top. They are contesting a bot point, but it's not nearly as oppressive as it was historically. They're also kind of staggered at this point on C, to be honest, from B. They decided not to all in on B, which should have saved them, but it looked like part of their army was still in a position to all in anyway, and we figured out that they weren't going to all in pretty much right away, so we stepped and caught some of their players off of respawns, and were able to capitalize on that. Let's see if Whirl makes it back in time to show that off. It's always a little sketchy moving fast forward with this thing because sometimes it breaks. So Whirl makes it back in time. We're still holding that top point. We dealt with the wrap effectively. We had Kilosh completely call it out in the IGL, which is something that historically does not happen. And I felt like we're actually being attentive for that. We were down Bop for shot call. We had Kilosh shot call, but Kilosh and Bop are like relatively close to the same level of shot calling. I think Bot brings a little bit more strategical elements. Kilosh is more of a we're all inning here kind of guy. Like he plays very aggro with his shot calling kind of methods, and you can see it reflect here where we're playing uh much more interface. We're not really resetting at all. I don't think we did one regroup versus with Bob. We typically do about 5 to 10 regroups every war, and we were able to control like just have the tempo the entire duration of the war. So A goes down pretty much immediately. I'm gonna fast forward to the actual fort fight because no one really cares about the gate phase, but the gates go down within like a minute and a half. So good timing there. The horns take a lot longer. IGVGs kind of lacked on the horn output this war. I believe we were down a few IGVGs. We had 49 people slotted for this war that were intended to be slotted, with me hopping in at the very last second. So was not ideal. And then our player that filled that we just got off the leaderboard, he is the GOAT, but he did go 0-9, so he's not completely the GOAT, but he tried. He did pretty well. And he pushed for us after, so that was kind of nice. But uh, anyways, getting to this gate fight, Supple is like kind of winning, I would say, this B gate off the start. But the thing that changes here compared to other wars is we're actually able to get through on the side gates, which doesn't typically happen. We're able to create pressure on this B gate and swing it to the side because of that, and we don't actually have to stay in this choke for super long. That being said, they do deal with the B gate push like fairly effectively. It's just they have this problem with holding space that you still see at every war. Like Rasputin is like he's the IGBB that's supposed to be protecting B gate. He's like not causing a lot of like disruption slash damage because we're actually looking at him with the melees and IGVGs now. We're not just letting him play the game for free, which is something that we have taken from EU and why EU doesn't think IGBB is nearly as good, I think. And that's just kind of resulted in us getting more value. Uh, I'll try to get this to load. If it doesn't load, we can hop over to like a raid plan and talk about this fort setup. But we had a pretty standard split for fort. We had two groups in B, like kind of two and a half. Uh, so we slotted two BBs here that were outside of a point group. So that's 2.5 groups. We had just Faint, who was roaming off this back line because they had muskets over here. And on the sides, I believe we had 2 to 3 groups on both sides. On A gate, the muskets were on that side, so A gate just typically was not able to rotate in for free. And our back gates each had like one-ish. So that's a pretty standard split, but the side gates are actually able to get through. We'll see that if the VOD loads. VOD load, it's cool. Uh, you see people on point where like we're generally getting pressure. We're living. The healers on our side aren't super heavily contested in that B choke. Like they're contested, but we have BBs there peeling, which we didn't have before. We were doing like fire staff and bows, but we felt that BBs might be better suited for that role, and it felt a little bit better than it did in the past. I wouldn't say it was like strictly better. Like I think both those roles kind of work to that for a degree. It's just about like kind of locking those players in place, preventing their heals from getting there consistently, so that they can get forced out and your healers can play the game in that area. See, Whirl here is like generally getting value. Not a lot of people are dying. I think we stopped playing for like those 3-2-1 like kill combos as much, and we're kind of listening for the big macro calls of like sides to kill, because individual skill is not super expressed in this meta. Like a lot of the kills need to come from like a 5 to 10 man crash, and the best person that can coordinate that crash is usually a shot caller in a war. So that's what Kilosh is doing. Like, he would be like, "Hey, crush this left side. There's a big clump here." You see Supple's doing that right here on our left side or their right side, where there's that big clump. They have 10 to 20 people hit that clump, and then we all get wiped, and we go back to spawn. And that's something that kind of separates shot callers in this meta, because a lot of the meta right now is kind of getting carried by shot callers and by groups just individually kind of making enough plays. Like, if you're not able to get to the point where you can get to the fort, you lack the, or lack, if you can't get to like the point area outside without dying, you kind of lack in like basic fundamental skill, and that's stuff that you can practice in OPR and in 5v5 duel arena, like, and duels, and as well as 3v3/arenas. But once you get that down, a lot of it kind of comes down to shot calling as well as punishing mistakes. You can finish people off that are low if they get forced out by someone, but it feels like you can't consistently generate your own kills. Like, you see Whirl here swinging on people, their health bar is not going down. That's because the with the increased health and with sacreds, you effectively will not lose your, you will not out damage the healing that a sacred has. I would say that healing is in general like a little bit overtuned along with effective max HP. I think if they wanted to do something to this meta to make it a little bit better, I would say that the max HP is like kind of forgiving. Like, there's still spots like that where you just get blown up and there's not a ton that you can do about it. But max HP being overtuned a bit will prevent one-shot combos, which is nice. But at the same time, you lack on in terms of actual like heal potential. And if you nerf like how much healing is actually coming through, then people will still die, but you won't have access to that burst, and then you won't have these weird situations where someone's playing in the sacred and they effectively become invincible for a bit. Like, typically right now you'll have like to take space, for example, you have one guy kind of play more aggro than another. So if this is the red line, this is the blue line, you'll have like one guy on blue play more aggro. He'll get a sacred, he'll just play here and just kind of AFK, and then this blue line will push up to this sacred, and then it will kind of flip flop back and forth where you're playing off each other's sacreds, and that's how space is kind of given and taken. And just if you are not able to shut that down, then stuff can go south like really, really fast. That's something I think we were able to take advantage of like pretty well by doing again that high line, having its them so they couldn't force out our healers or playing for all that space presence because kills are just not coming out naturally except for muskets. I don't go through the stats here fully. I just went through assists, but they had muskets with like 9 to 10 kills in a 20-minute war, which is really, really good for the duration of the war that they had and compared to their assists. So if they have like 10 kills and they have 80 assists total, that means that Musket's like involved in the majority of their kills there. So I think that was overall pretty good. We might not be able to get to the end here unless that, of course, that happens like right as I refresh it. But we'll get back into it in a second. But yeah, we're just able to get through those side gates, push up very, very hard, prevent their healers from being able to free cast, and then from there they start falling over. And I'll wait for this to show up.
Below.
Bro, I really just be like,
All right, get back into it. Like, you can see here, I'll pause it in a second, how our back eights are contested. You can see that red is generally winning in the back eights. I wouldn't say that we're winning very much, but we actually have like some blue people that are present on the side gate, which historically just does not happen a lot with dropouts. But we've been voting. People have been yelled at to just like walk through, kind of just like five-head it. And I think the Supple's been getting kind of greedier with their positioning. They have been like trying to push the limits because they haven't been punished for a while, and then finally stuff was able to crack here because we're taking risks, actually pushing through, and they're taking risk as well in the defense, which typically isn't as rewarding. You see, we're able to get really, really fast spin quickly. If we look at like how this spin kind of generated here, it generated like relatively quickly. There they have a clump on this bottom point. They step off the point first of all, which is a mistake, but then we have our side gate crash onto point, right? And that doesn't typically happen for dropouts because that side gate doesn't typically get through. So if you actually look at like who's on the point here from like a red side, this is like their entire duration of point. They have like 1 to 2 people on point, and then blue has like 9 to 15 people on point. So this is like super fast tick. That's about the maximum speed that it can tick on a point right now. They continue to not like force that point. They're kind of playing that edge. That clump fight that's happening is a little bit off the point. It's not actually on the point that Lungod is on. Lungod dies. They're not just dying on the point. They're dying off the point. Their point team died off the point, so now their outside teams off a respawn have to crash on the point immediately. And when that happens, we take that time to go off a point, kind of focus the healers for a bit, and then we swing back. So that's like playing it very safe. We're not going for an all in here, which is why this starts deticking really quickly, because we are just not as present on the point. Some people die for this because they were expecting an all in, so that's the con to this. But we're still able to hold that space. You see how these healers over here are not able to free cast, and their melee are still getting CC'd. Uh, do we have our respawns kind of coming back in here, right? Because they just had their respawns, they crash point with their respawns. This lane in B is still open. It's not heavily contested. We're still contesting their mid, and now our B gate's going to start coming through here. You see that Supple is pushing they're with their healers into B choke because they can't effectively queue on the sides anymore, and that's happening right as we're zerging through B. This tick starts going up. Supple's healers are running out of pockets to play in. This pocket over here is contested. They have some people queuing here. You can see blue people up here. Hell is completely ours. We have healers in their hell right now, as people like to call it, like that top point area. So there's effectively not a safe spot for their healers to play in. So people on point are basically surviving off of AoE heals. That's never a good sign, especially in points this ticked. They get another respawn. They call for an all-in. We step off a point for a second. Then we call for an all-in because we didn't have everyone on the point. And then that's it. They had people there, but it's effectively they lost in fort because they didn't have enough people stepping to point. They're playing a little bit off that point, and because of that, we're able to get that fast tick super fast. Outside of fort, that's not as punishing, but inside of fort, it's the points seem to tick a lot faster. I'm not sure the exact rate of which stuff ticks because it's like something that's kind of hard to test unless it's a farm war. And typically in farm wars, people don't want to wait around to test how fast a fort can tick or the minimum maximum speed of that. So that's something that just doesn't happen. But you can see here from the stats, pretty effective war from us overall. It was like a 20-minute win, which is like relatively good, especially for Everfall. That's like pretty impressive. The B and A gates all came off a snowball 5 minutes in, capping B, rotating or not A gate, B and C outside came off a snowball. And then in fort, gates went down really quickly. Horns took a little bit longer, but it was just that crashing from the side gates on the B that I think opened up a lot of stuff. And that's a pressure that Supple hasn't really felt in the past, and that's something that they were not able to effectively deal with their newer point team players who are still experienced players, but they're not near the skill level that they used to have. So it'll be interesting if they can get their older players to get off Black Desert Online and come play New World again, or if those players will be sticking it out and I'll be trying to do VOD reviews with them and leveling them up. And I'll see you guys in the next video.